Lock your windows, lock your doors, and enter the alternate nightmare. The way the Indians do is to dry their corn and dig a hole beside the hogan and put it down there. Then they put a stone over it and some dirt and weeds, so no one will find it. And then they take their goats and sheep back into the mountains for the winter. When they want some corn, they go to their hogan and get it. A family did that, and after a while, they needed some more corn. They had a beautiful daughter, and lots of men wanted to marry her. They sent her with her little brother to get it. They both rode on one horse, and when they got there, they said it was too late to go home. They would get the corn in the morning, so they went into the hogan that they were going to sleep in. They had tied the two in front of their horse, and he went off to feed, but he kept coming back to the hogan, and his ears were up. They could see better than they could in the dark, and the girl knew somebody was out there, because in the afternoon, some men had been near there, and one man said, "Now I can get that girl," and all the other men went away, and at night she saw a dark shadow in the woods. She knew a human wolf was after her, but she did not tell her brother, so she dug a hole under the hogan, and she told her little brother to get into it. If anyone came, he would crawl outside and ride fast to their family, and she would try to fight as long as she could. She tied the blanket over the door as much as she could, so it would take the wolf a long time to get in, and the boy could get away. Then, later in the night, she heard someone fall off the top of the hogan, and she knew the wolf had come, and the boy crawled out, and he cut the rope around the horse's feet. He jumped on the horse, and the horse was scared. He didn't want to stay there, and the boy didn't need to whip him or hold the reins. He ran as fast as he could, and the boy held onto his mane. Then the wolf came in, and she fought him as hard as possible. The boy soon got home, and he told his family, and his father and mother got on their horses, and they rode as fast as they could. Back to the sister. Her big brother was not home. He had made a longbow and lots of fine arrows with eagle feathers. He could sure shoot. He went out hunting that day and stopped at a hogan for the night. Indians do that when they are away from home. At night, it snowed a little, and the next morning, he said, "This is a good day for hunting. I guess I will shoot some rabbits." And it was snowing, and he had some good new moccasins with heavy soles, and he had his feet in burlap sacks to keep them dry. It was snowing, and he was a fine shot. He could hit whatever he wanted to. He saw 2 rabbits, and he took 2 arrows, and he shot them. He never missed. He was riding along, and he saw a big track, but the snow had covered it, and he did not know whether it was a horse or a man or some animal. So he blew the snow out of the track, and then he knew it was a human wolf, and there was blood too. So he followed that track. He aimed the man's neck shaft arrow, and it went in so far that only a little bit 1 inch was showing. The stories of a Navajo medicine man or shamans having encounters or altercations with skinwalkers is one not largely outspoken by them much. Like a Vatican exorcist, today's most modern encounters are either a host seeking help from the medicine man, either spiritually, holistically, or physically. In most ways, they are like priests. People find comfort in their prayers, blessing, and guidance in times they don't understand fully or seek just to be enlightened by words, wisdom, or knowledge. They are also like an alternative psychiatrist or therapist with experience in medicinal remedies, psychological therapy, or physical therapy. From what I was able to piece together from bits and parts of other stories, a group of medicine men when horses were introduced to Navajos, some with their abilities being mediums, energy drawers, conduits, some supernatural or natural, would investigate claims and rumors around the Navajo Nation, seeking out these skinwalkers or spiritual and unexplainable phenomenons. People who become hosts to its strange phenomenons would seek out these minutes and men for help. Some even travel hundreds of miles to the southwest. In one section counter, I've heard from an elder is that when he was a young boy, becoming a man, his grandfather's grandfather would ride around the Navajo Nation and off, sometimes going as far into the Canadian territories, to the Northern Territory of Mexico, helping people of all ailments spiritually and physically under discretion, and some form of payment. He then talked about when they would come across definite proof of demonic hauntings and presences, much like how a church would investigate demonic presences. One encounter he does remember that happened in the heartland regions of the Navajo Nation. An older man spent a week herding his livestock to their winter property. When he finally returned home in the day, he found that his wife had not prepared their wagons with their belongings, but seeing her rifle and horse were gone, she must be getting supplies or visiting other nearby residents they know in their rural region. Times back in the day for Navajo. They kept busy all day. Much like ranchers and farmers, they were always cautious of strangers, and burglarizing and ransacking the property was common. But lowland tracking was a widespread skill before it wasn't. He then noticed nothing was disturbed or out of the ordinary for them, but had a feeling his wife went to nearby friends. His gut was right, and he saw that his wife was there, but he also asked why she left their place with their valuables and wagons on guard. She told him the following: one of the goats came back and only stood in one direction, stuck in hand, and attempted to snap it out of whatever trance it was in. It screamed and dropped dead. She thought it could be the ailments or termites in its horns eating away at its brain. She did not want to waste whatever was salvageable. She butchered the goat and hung its wool skin to dry in the sun, putting the still intact headless goat in back of one of the wagons as she went about finishing chores to pack the wagon. She heard rattling outside, thinking it was a rattlesnake on the property getting ready for fall. She went to find it but came to notice the sheepskin was gone. Thinking somebody is on the property and robbing them, she went into the hogan to get her rifle gun at the ready. She didn't get far before noticing that the goatskin was dragging on the ground, thinking it was animals instead. She followed the dragon trail and denied an animal in the distance. Instead, she noticed not far ahead, a skin hide was driving itself, gliding over the ground. She shot at it more than several times, but it kept going towards some washes in the land with hill terrain. Unsure of what she had seen, she decided not to stay the night and left for the neighbors. Hearing this, the husband had her and the neighbors find the local medicine men common in the area, but it would be a couple of days. Returning with an elderly medicine man, 3 men accompanied him. The wife then showed them where she stopped following the skin, and they went on from there. Unable to accompany them, the husband and wife kept a bonfire going all night as a waypoint for them to see in the night sky. Late into the first night, one man returned and asked if they could spear a horse, as one of theirs had fallen into a ditch and severely injured itself. They had to shoot at Green. They let them take the husband's horse, as it was fast into the area into the next day. No sign of them returning happened. When it finally collapsed in, it was never rebuilt. Cindy was my best friend at the time, so she came with me to this new house. Sorry for the bad formatting in advance, as I am unmobile. I've never shared my story here, as I'm not sure what it was because I don't live anywhere near Res. I live in Florida. I cannot think of any rational explanation for what I saw. However, first and backstory, I lived in a city near-ish Orlando and went to school with the girl who I will call Cindy. My mother worked at a different school nearby as a teacher. We would move towards central Florida in a very rural, absolute middle of nowhere area after school had ended. So it was Cindy and I's last day of school, but my mom still had to teach for another week. She drove us out to the new house to stay there on our own for an entire week while she finished work and would stay with my grandmother in town. So Cindy and I are so excited to have the new house to ourselves for a week and get set up in my room and stuff. We decided that we wanted to still go on late walks like we used to and thought about going that night. We agreed we should go while it's still light out because we don't know the area not well. All my area was a giant square-shaped road or block. It wasn't a block, though, because in any house, there were just a mailbox and a gate on the road with a driveway that went out for like half a mile until you saw the house. So we're walking on the square road around dusk, and we get to the corner of the road, go to turn, and watch this massive deer walk out of one side of the road from the trees, maybe 50 yards ahead of us. We just stopped or slowed to look for a second, because although I'm from north, she'd never seen a deer being from the city, and I had never seen one so close. This thing also was a buck, and again, huge, so I told her not to get too close as it could be dangerous. All this happened in 5 seconds while it walked to the middle of the road. Then this deer stopped in its tracks, turned its head to look at us, and just stared for what felt like 10 seconds. Realistically, we just kind of watched this deer like a staring contest. Then it turns its head forward again, stands upon its hind legs and starts limp walking into the other side of the trees. Then we just watched the trees rustle a ton and walked home. That's when we were like, yeah, did we see that? We hadn't walked the rest of the week, and Mom came home earlier than expected, so we felt better. So here's where I'm not sure if anything. These deer's legs were not only what they should look like. A deer's legs are opposite ours or dogs. Their back knees are pointed behind them when they stand on all fours instead of in front. This deer's legs did not point behind them. Its knees faced forwards as if they had been twisted around perfectly. My mom worked in her family butcher shop as a kid and had seen deer brought in with ankles twisted and broken and healed in a completely new position. It makes sense to walk on 3 legs as that one heals. I can't see how this could have healed both of its legs or how they both twist so perfectly, or especially how it would walk on those legs alone. I think its legs were backward is why it somewhat limped forwards. Although it didn't have any broken or twisted bones, it did not appear to be in pain. It had antlers. No idea if it had ears or tail. I hear everybody say it won't have a tail if it's a skinwalker. I had no idea what skinwalkers or any cryptids were at this point. All I paid attention to was its size, which had to be at least 8 feet tall, standing with a slight hunch. And its legs, I remember we mentioned it smelled like a rotten egg. I don't recall a coppery scent. It could just have been sulfur, but I'm not sure. Despite looking this thing right in the eyes, it was too far away even to see them, and my horrible vision, of course, so I can't tell you what those looked like either. I didn't look for all the telltale signs you look for in a skinwalker because, again, I'd never even heard of them. I have so many questions about this experience. Why didn't it try and attack us? Why was it in the middle of Florida? Why would it almost show us that it walked like that instead of, I don't know, keeping its cool? If that's not what it is, by the way. So this was when I was a lot younger, and I lived in Texas, probably around 9 years old. You know how when you're younger, you just don't remember as many details, and it all seems kind of dreamlike. And this was like that, except I'm almost 100% sure it's not a dream, based on how clearly I can visualize certain aspects of it. I should just get into the story, but if you've had similar encounters, please tell me anyway. I love animals, like I just love watching nature, documentaries about them, and studying them. And when I lived in Texas, we had a farmer's pasture at the back of my house, separated by a rusty cattle fence that was around 6 to 7 feet tall, based on the fact that we had to climb a fairway to get over it. When we accidentally lost balls on the other side of the fence, the cows would sometimes come within looking distance of the back of my house. The farmer's pasture was huge since we were in a semi-rural area, and that day, I could see them in the distance. So I went out to watch them and tried to lure them over to me. I had been gazing intently at them for I don't know how long when I looked to my right and saw a huge buck next to me. It couldn't have been more than a foot for me at most, but I never heard it come up beside me, nor do I know why it would have done so, seeing as deer are very easily spooked by the slightest movement. Anyway, at the same time, as I saw it, it saw me. We locked eyes, and that's what I remember best was that its eyes were oddly intelligent and humanish, and it seemed benevolent. We stared at each other for at most 30 seconds before it was gone over the cattle fence with a metallic clang. I can only assume that its backhoe struck the fence on the way over because I remember the clanging noise and it rattling like a metal fence. If you kicked it, I think I was also grasping the fence tightly because I remember that I felt the force of the metal as the buck clipped it. I looked down to the field to follow where it had gone and saw another big deer, a doe, and I think it bound into the smallish thicket that was probably 200 to 300 feet away from the fence. After they both disappeared into the thicket, I could not catch sight of them anymore, and I ran in to tell my mom what I had seen. I told her that it clipped the fence on the way over, and I remember her saying that it was probably a yearling that ended my encounter. But there are some weird things about it more than they already were a premise that I wanted to point out. Number 1, the buck was huge. I think I came up to its shoulders. Now, I was 9, so it makes sense. I guess it just seemed really big for a yearling. Number 2, how could it have walked up to the fence and not noticed me standing there? It just seems very, very unlikely. Furthermore, how did we manage to look at each other at the same time without noticing one another before? And why didn't I hold my gaze for so long? It seemed benevolent. If it was a skinwalker, I don't know why it would be, but that's all I can think of. As I mentioned before, it seemed intelligent. Maybe that was just my kid brain shocked at all, but it seemed as though it was staring into the depths of my soul. When we locked eyes, the buck and other deer bounded into the small thicket and then completely disappeared. I couldn't see them afterward, even though I'm pretty sure I spent at least a minute looking for them. The thicket wasn't big either, so I should have been able to spot the silhouettes or something. Anyway, and that's all I can think of for now. I'm not sure how to begin this. This didn't just affect me, but my family in different ways, and it continued to mess with me for years after we moved from the house where it all started. I'm trying to take something that didn't do many things over several years and trim it down to details that seem important. I'm sorry if this reads weird or awkward. My grandmother was supposed to have traced her side of the family back to an unregistered family of natives that escaped the Trail of Tears. And after telling a person this strange thing that I usually kept secret, they suggested that it might be a skinwalker. But I don't know. I know there is a lot of family strife in that house where the haunting started, that bubbled up to the surface. A spirit there likes to scare me by calling my name, slamming doors, giving me strange nightmares, and even mimicking the voices of the family to other members. The first time I can think of it appearing was when we came back from a road trip at night, and Dad was driving, and he hits the brakes hard and swerves because he'd seen a wolf with no eyes stepping out into our lane and look at our oncoming car. And because everybody else was asleep, he was the only one to see it, and there was nobody around to suggest that anything had physically been there. The second time I think it showed itself was many years after we had long moved from the house that this all started in. I was home alone at night messaging a friend, and I saw a prominent figure walking up the road. I was frozen in fear as it approached and eventually passed by the house we lived in. And what I remember was something with a strange skull, kind of like that of a monkey skull as a head or covering its head. And the rest, completely hidden behind a cloak of some dark-colored fur. It hasn't been around for a bit now, but while it was around, or possibly pursuing me, it had caused a lot of hardship for my family and me. I remember that if I talked or thought about it too much, I would draw your attention back to me when it seemed like it had left, and I would have let my guard down. Whatever it has always made me feel terrified and unsafe. I used to have symbols of protection from whatever religion I could think of to try and find some shelter from it. I'm not sure what this entity is, but this is not a story I share much as I know how it sounds, and I don't want to go through the usual ridicule and dismissive comments. Story 1. I'm pretty new, so I apologize for my lack of knowledge regarding this creature. One thing I must come out and say before I tell the story is that this encounter did not happen anywhere near Navajo land. Therefore, I am leaning more towards a wendigo or not deer. If I should move this, please let me know. It was late summer, and my mom and I had decided we should go out for a spontaneous hike. We researched and found one that said it was a 4-mile round trip. Sounded easy enough. We got up early that morning and began our trek. The entire forest had a horrible vibe. Even my mother picked up on it. She's never been into any of the paranormal, etc. We've been walking for hours now, and this forest just seemed to get weirder and weirder. We had plenty of water and food, so I really can't say if we were just dehydrated or tired. We began to hear singing in the woods, and we just stopped and stared at each other. We had to be miles into the woods by now. Our step counter saying we had well surpassed the promised 4 miles were precisely where we were where the singing is coming from. We just looked at each other and began laughing. I remember her saying no way, shaking her head, and carrying on. It's been quite some time now, and we have not encountered another person on this trail. Suddenly, this man walking fast surpasses us and rounds a bend behind a rocky hill, so we could not see him anymore. He said no words, just came up behind us and darted past. Again, my mother and I laughed and envied his athleticism until we rounded the bend ourselves to find that he was gone entirely out of sight. The path after that bend was reasonably straight, and you could see far ahead of you, so there is no way he would have been able to clear that entire area fast. This time, my mom stops and says, "You got to be kidding me." We're thoroughly freaked out after this. Eventually, we reach the peak, and after walking that long, you think somebody would probably want to stay there for a while and enjoy the view. Well, we pretty much got to the top, and then left. We never discussed it, but I could tell we were both uncomfortable and just wanted to get out of here. We're maybe halfway back to this trail now, and the sun is beginning to set. We're moving fast to get out of here. Our step counters said we had hiked 10 miles compared to the 4. As the forest got darker, I began to hear leaves crunching behind us. I reluctantly turned around and noticed it was a buck several yards away. We hurried along as not to disturb it further, but then I began seeing something. It was following us from a distance. It did so, almost like a predator hiding and peeking. I tell my mom that deer is following us, and we're pretty much at a jog now. The buck would not let us go. I would sometimes notice that it would catch up and follow just beside us. It always remained several yards away, though we were always lurking head down. I've lived out in the country my whole life, and I've seen all the deer you can ever imagine. I've never been followed by one like this. It seemed more than just curiosity. It felt horrible, predatory. I felt like I was in danger. We were always hearing those footsteps behind me, the feeling of being watched. Clearly, we made it out unharmed, but I wonder if it actually intended to harm us or if it was just ushering us out of the forest. All in all, it was a freaky experience. Something is up with those woods.